On the Hawkeye Sports Network from Learfield, this is the Fight for Iowa podcast, brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy, proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Big Ten Conference. Also by Iowa's Corn Farmers of the Iowa Corn Growers Association and Iowa Corn Promotion Board. You may think Iowa grows corn, but the truth is, corn grows Iowa. Also brought to you by Shields. We're right there with you in Des Moines, Sioux City, Iowa City, and Cedar Falls. This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
Next month brings the 50th anniversary of groundbreaking legislation. It was June 1972 that Congress passed into law Title IX, promising gender equity in collegiate athletics. Today, over 400 female student athletes participate in a dozen sports at the University of Iowa. Dr. Christine Grant was Iowa's first and only director of women's athletics, serving in that capacity from 1973 until 2000, working alongside men's athletic director Bump Elliott. Grant put together a Hall of Fame career, with a dozen programs capturing 27 Big Ten titles. Grant hired basketball coaches C. Vivian Stringer and Lisa Bluter, softball Hall of Famer Gail Blevins, and field hockey's Beth Beglin. The field hockey facility bears Christine Grant's name. Beyond Johnson County in the Big Ten, though, Grant was a national pioneer and a strong voice in the fight for gender equity in athletics. This week's Fight for Iowa podcast remembers Dr. Christine Grant in just a minute.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
Oh, you know that old injury of yours, the one in your knee or maybe back? Instead of going to the doctor and then doing physical therapy, why not start with therapy first? Athletico Physical Therapy is changing the whole healing process around. Their physical therapists will find the source of your pain and help fix it. Start with them and start living pain-free. Just like that.
It all starts with Athletico Physical Therapy. Schedule your free assessment at athletico.com. No prescription needed. Proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
The Iowa Athletics Department will host a Dr. Christine Grant Celebration of Life service on Sunday, May 22nd in Carver Hawkeye Arena at 3 p.m. The event is open to the public. Dr. Grant passed away New Year's Eve at the age of 85. Not only was Christine Grant Iowa's first director of women's athletics, she was a founding member of the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, and served as its president from 1979 to 1982. The native of Scotland earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in physical education at Iowa and never left. Grant helped bring about the implementation of Title IX that required equal opportunities for all in the fields of athletics and academics. Barbara Burke is Iowa's Deputy Director of Athletics and the school's Senior Women's Administrator and Chief Operating Officer. To Burke, Christine Grant set the table for her generation.
When she first started out, providing leadership and goal-driven leader, genuine, poised, competent, just, a woman at the forefront of intercollegiate athletics. And we owe her so much of not only what we have here at the University of Iowa, but nationally. And she set the stage, that landmark legislation, took the lead when others wouldn't, and assisted in getting Title IX passed. And, we've never looked back from that point. So she really was a driving force.
Her courage in as you mentioned, a trailblazing period for women's athletics and the infancy of Title IX, I think it speaks volumes for her tenacity, and maybe courage and tenacity go hand in glove. But she was that loudspeaker, that shining beacon with the NCAA hierarchy, and she would not be denied.
No, absolutely. I like to say she put a light on it and that light never went out. And she just pushed and pushed and pushed, and so many wonderful opportunities. And what I like to say is, she was that generation right ahead of me that had a vision for where they wanted to take women's athletics. And she passed that torch on to my generation. And I take it with great pride and confidence to continue her legacy and make sure that her legacy continues on with my generation, and then my responsibility for the next generation. Because if we don't do it, who will? And so I think it's just critically important we continue to educate, guide, and direct our not just our young women, but also men and boys that participate in sports.
Good points. What I always loved about Dr. Grant, she not only was good in the here and now, but she was a founding member of the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women and served as its president, among other roles, including chair of the Committee on Gender Equity. Now, these roles occurred during the 1970s and 80s. It seems to me she was always a block or two or a mile ahead of everybody else where initiatives, interests, and rights for female student athletes were concerned. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. She was a visionary on what it could be, and she was not going to be denied on what she thought it should be. And the work that she did with the AIAW, what you just mentioned, was critically important to the growth of women's athletics. And, I remember as a student athlete in college, my first year was actually under the AIAW umbrella before the NCAA began to sponsor women's sports. And so I experienced that, understand it, and take great pride that she was a leader in that organization.
It's almost destiny that Dr. Grant and Bump Elliott were eventually joined as one. Because to me, it's amazing how similar in personality those two were. Rarely a raised voice, always level-headed, thinking outside the box. I would have loved to have sat in on the initial meeting between those two when Christine was hired as Iowa women's athletic director. Talk about groundbreaking, revolutionary, really. And Bump had an eye for that. Any guy that's hired Hayden Fry, Lute Olson, Dan Gable, C. Vivian Stringer, and folks of that talent and that grade certainly have an eye on what's right.
Yeah, clearly Bump knew how to hire great people. He knew how to evaluate great people. And, with Dr. Grant being the first athletic director for women's sports here was just amazing. And the fact that during that time period, that he knew the value of it, and he knew that it brought value not only to Iowa, but across the country. And I think there's one of those first again, right? We talk about, we just added women's wrestling. That's a first. Well, you go back 50 years in our history, we were the first to add Dr. Grant as a women's athletic director. So I think there's so many milestones in this program that we have to celebrate, and it starts with her.
She was born in Scotland. She played and coached field hockey in Canada before coming to Iowa, where she earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in physical education, and she never left. What did she see in the University of Iowa, the state of Iowa, and its people? Perhaps you see some of the same qualities and opportunities for female athletes.
I think that she saw, number one, the opportunity. I think she saw the great people, and I think she saw and believed that she could make a difference here because women's athletics is embraced and celebrated here at the University of Iowa. And she set that tone. So, what she did is amazing. What we continue to do is amazing, and we give her all the credit.
50 years ago, Title IX came into being, and a lot of it had to do with what we're enjoying today for women's intercollegiate athletics. Had a lot to do with Dr. Christine Grant. She was a pioneer indeed, and it's only right that we honor her on this life service celebration Sunday, May 22nd at Carver Hawkeye Arena. What most are you looking forward to with that event, Barb?
A lot of her friends and peers and counterparts will be in attendance, and just hearing them lift her up in her work and her endeavors over her life. Some of her family members will be in town. I'm excited that they get to see and hear the impact that she truly made, not only here again in Iowa, but across the country. Because sometimes as family members, we don't always hear all the wonderful things that our family does in the workplace. And so I think for me, them having the opportunity to hear that and celebrate with others that surrounded Dr. Grant during her life.
In 2007, Christine Grant was named one of the 100 most influential sports educators in America by the Institute of International Sport. The late NCAA president, Miles Brand, said this, quote, "Christine is a preeminent and passionate leader who represents an entire class of pioneers that broke through barriers to the benefit of women's sports. She and others did the heavy lifting that has afforded college women athletes the opportunities they enjoy today, and her courage and character have made her a role model for today's student athletes and athletic administrators," end quote. More Fight for Iowa after a word from our sponsors.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
There's a sense of pride that comes from the life of a farmer. How many people can say they have a famous tan named after them, or be known for their wave when they drive past neighbors and strangers alike on a 2-lane road? Whether it's a farmer's tan or the farmer's wave, we are proud to be known for a lot of things. We feel that pride every night at the dinner table, knowing we feed our family and yours. Iowa Corn is proud to be on the sidelines cheering on the Iowa Hawkeyes. In Iowa, we grow corn, but the truth is, corn grows Iowa.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
Football's Tyler Lindebaum and women's golfer Manuela Lizarazu were named Iowa's Big Ten Medal of Honor recipients this week. The Medal of Honor is the conference's most exclusive award, recognizing academic and athletic achievement. Lindebaum is an enterprise leadership major from Solon, who earned consensus All-America honors this past season, just the 12th player in history to collect that honor. Lindebaum was a first-round selection of the Baltimore Ravens in last month's NFL draft. Lizarazu is a double major in neurobiology and biomedical engineering. The Bogota, Colombia native posted 3 career top 10 and 5 top 20 finishes. I'll be back after this timeout.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
Here we go. Exciting adventures await. Grab your bucket list and keep the fun going all summer long. Pitch a tent, grab a sleeping bag, and sleep as a family under the stars. Fire up the grill and host a backyard barbecue. Visit a local trail for a hike or a drive to a state park for an all-day family adventure. With all there is to do this summer, we encourage you to get outside and make new memories. Whatever you do this summer, Shields is right there with you.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
That's our Fight for Iowa podcast for this week. Thanks for tuning in. We're sponsored by Shields, Iowa Corn, and Athletico. I'm Gary Dolphin. Go Hawks.
Hawkeye fans, remember to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Once you become a Fight for Iowa podcast subscriber, you'll automatically receive the latest episodes of the Fight for Iowa podcast, the Hawkeyes Voice podcast, Hawk Talk replays, exclusive game day content, and more. The preceding has been a Learfield presentation on the Hawkeye Sports Network.